you in the background. Marie and I are here in her home. She was so kind to open up her home to me, and we're drinking ginger and lemon tea.
Delicious.
What do you have, Marie? Coffee. And she has some coffee.
Uh-oh, it's one of those nights then. Does that mean that you guys are in Arizona?
No. I'm in Visalia, California.
You are in Visalia. I was wondering if that's what you were saying, because you said something about being at is it your dad's birthday that's coming up?
Yeah, day after tomorrow.
Holy cow. February is a good month of birthdays. I got a couple good people that
right.
that have birthdays this month as well. Trying to figure out this light without making it bleach me. I feel like it's so dark around, so I like have this very focal light. So I guess we'll see how it goes. Okay.
Well, welcome. Sure glad that you are here. Oh, you got it. Okay. And we have our tea. Drinking.
I know, doing good things. I brought water. I was gonna make tea, but I was like, if I drink too much, I'm probably going to regret it and then have to run away real quick.
I need to go pee real quick.
Which is not the smartest thing if you're in the middle of talking with a bunch of people.
Okay, now I'm going to unpause this real quick. Are you able to still share your screen or no?
I don't know how to do it when I'm not the host, so I'm just going to talk. And if anybody wants any of the images that I use, and you know what images I use, I kind of made it broad and focused on some very big key topics between women's hormones and then adrenal fatigue. Okay. But obviously one of the big things is that you wanted me to focus on was the adrenal insufficiency. So I kind of talk about women's hormones and then PMS and perimenopause and then menopause just briefly. And then I kind of go into more of the idea of cortisol and DHEA. Okay. The joys of burnout in today's society. And then we can you'll have questions, I'm sure, and then other people will have questions. And then usually it stems from there.
Okay. And
I always like to pull up the chat because sometimes I can answer a question as I'm going.
Okay. Do you want to email that to me? And I may, if you have your presentation, I may be able to pop it up. I can kind of play with it. And if I can get it to go, I will.
Well, what I can do is I can email you the 2 links for the images, like the menstrual cycle image and then the adrenal pathway that I talk a lot about.
Okay.
Do you want me to do that? Because I can pop it into the link here because I've got them all saved. Because as always, I love my charts and I'm on my work computer, so it works beautifully.
Okay, perfect.
So I will just message it to you. There's the one that I love.
Okay.
And then there's this lovely one because I wasn't sure what age group everybody was in.
Wide span.
That's what I figured. So I wanted to talk about some just basic female menstrual cycle stuff too, which I think is always very important. Yes. And I don't think anybody talks enough about it as as it being a true medical concern,
Right. And I think today, Dr. Sundemeyer, I think we're more aware of our bodies and stuff. And I think back, 20-ish years ago, it was the change. And
nobody talked about it.
Oh, no, not just no, but no, or that, she's going to go crazy or, no longer have
associated with a lot.
Libido, so forth and so on. And I think, thank goodness, we've grown up a bit,
Slowly, integratively, yes. Maybe not so much medically. We still pretend these pathways don't exist in the conventional world sometimes.
We do.
Although they are getting better.
Naturopathic. Yeah. Okay, so I see. Oh, nice. Okay, I am sharing my screen. Let me see if I can. You emailed that to me, Dr. Sundemeyer?
No, I just, excuse me, I put it in the chat bar to the
Okay,
side of
okay.
your little guy.
Okay,
Those are both of those links. So they should just pop right up into your.
let's see. I'll play with this. We've got a few minutes here.
Ooh, we're going live. Scary.
Mhm. Do you see it in the group, Marie? Let's move our face right here. Okay. You can get out and get right back in. You should be fine. Okay. I'm probably going to stop sharing my screen because I don't think it's needed. Okay, where's Ian?
Ian's with
Is he
Daddy.
asleep? Okay.
No, he's in the house. But we had a fun little day. We went to the botanical gardens this morning for a couple hours and played, like, saw the butterflies. And so I got some great pictures of his crazy hair. His hair is lovely.
Okay, now, okay. He looks like Dr. Wallace, but and he's complected like your husband, but I still see you.
Yeah.
And I think it's amazing that, because usually it's one or the other. My kids look like Randy. I mean, if I didn't know I gave birth, I would wonder.
You were to be sure.
Girl. But I know that labor that I had.
You're
right?
like, I recall,
They
I have glimpses of memory of it.
But Ian, he looks like Dr. Wallace, but I told Randy, because I showed Randy the picture you sent me. And I said, oh my gosh, he looks like Dr. Wallace, but I can see Z in here, in his face somehow, some way. And I think that's amazing.
No, it's true. My mom says she sees me in him so much, and I'm just like, I feel like I can see my face shape in him, but I feel like he has the eyes and the nose, all like, I don't know. It's funny. If you saw my grandmother, I don't even know if I have like one picture of her, which is horrible. I got to get some other family photos, but she kind of had, he has like my paternal side, where like the super vibrant blue eyes, which is also Kevin's was born with super vibrant blue eyes.
Okay.
Like my biological father and my grandmother on my father's side all had these very ice blue eyes, which is kind of like what Ian has. So it's pretty crazy because it might not look all me, but he's got me in there somewhere.
Oh my goodness. I'm messaging April real quick. She said she wanted to try to jump on. She had an appointment at Verizon, and if she got out in time. So I was sharing with Marie, as we've got 5 minutes, so we're good. And we are live on Facebook. That's okay. My dad's 87th birthday, and Candace gets COVID.
Oh, I know.
So yeah, we're kind of keeping distance and whatnot. But I did get to see him from the window, his bedroom window, and I got to see Baxter, my dog. And I think he checks on Baxter more than he checks on me.
Oh, that's hilarious. I love it. But that's good. That's good. Sometimes
he
you
loves
need
having
your companions, right?
Absolutely. Randy calls him my son, but he's certainly not my son, but he's my companion. I mean, especially, being in Arizona without my family. Now, Randy's family is there. We love having them there, but
that's so nice.
Yeah, they moved there a year ago.
That you guys were they were so close to Prescott.
Yep.
Are they in the Prescott area or in the Phoenix area?
They're one street behind us.
Oh gosh, they're right down the street. I love it. It's
there.
Nice to have family close by. I do appreciate it, especially with Ian being so little. It's so nice to have his cousin right there, and my, intermittently a babysitter, and just growing up in the desert, kind of like how I did, where he can go visit with my mom and dad. So it is nice.
So your family is that you're in Tucson
I'm in Tucson.
and your family is there, or are both your family in
No,
Tucson?
so my family is here, and Kevin's family, sort of actually. He's from Modesto, but interestingly enough, his whole family recently moved to Jacksonville, Florida. I think it was like last year sometime they moved. And so he has a sister and his mom in Florida now, and his other sister's in Georgia. So they've all moved to the other coast, but they were in Modesto. So that's why we were practicing there for a length of time, because Kevin was from the Modesto area. So
That's where I met you.
then that's where you met me, when we had our little clinic in Turlock.
Yep.
It's actually a fun little clinic.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We've got about 2 minutes.
All right.
And then we can begin. Okay. So so just go to Facebook. If you bring up Facebook, and I'll get out and then get right back in. Here's groups, your pink preview party. Scroll up whenever you go to the group, just scroll up until you find us. Keep going. There you go. That should be us. And it'll pull up. Okay, we've got a couple of. Oh, Candace is on. And Eva's on.
She's doing good overall though.
Yeah. She said her smell. She doesn't have her smell, but her taste buds, which is, she could still taste a little bit and stuff. She's just been in bed. She's really trying to rest. Yeah, she's a teacher. So,
so she's exposed to a lot.
Yeah, a lot of little kids. Absolutely.
A lot of little kids. When we got sick, for the most part, we were just exhausted, thankfully. Just like slept. That's all but I was like, but we also had a 6-month-old. So it's really interesting that our major symptom was fatigue, but I didn't lose my smell or taste, but I no longer taste cilantro like I used to. It now tastes like soap. So you know how like genetically some people only taste soap when they eat cilantro and they hate it because of that?
Oh.
Well, I know what cilantro tastes like and how good it is.
Oh, yeah.
And now all I taste is soap, and I'm just like, this is the worst experience of my life, because
well, maybe you'll get it back.
I was hoping. I dosed the glutathione and the zinc, and I did the rounds of ivermectin, and I think I just got to do a couple ozone. I actually am prepping to do some ozone on myself to see if I can bump my immune system a little. But I was like, but is that genetic changes? That's where I was questioning everything, because they say it's a genetic predisposition if you taste cilantro as it being yummy or as soap, right? And I was like, did they change my genes? Did my genes change? That's where my brain goes. It's like, is this some genetic thing, or is my taste buds just funky now?
I will tell you that my enchilada soup with cilantro.
I don't want to talk. See how upsetting? Yeah. See,
so good.
It's a good salsa is not a good salsa.
Oh yeah. I know that's kind of sad. Well, why don't we go ahead and begin? Let me just officially welcome you, Dr. Sundemeyer. Dr. Sundemeyer and I met in Turlock area of California, and I have stuck by her side, maybe a thorn in her side, I don't know, all these years. And she is out of Tucson, Arizona. And tonight we're simply going to come together and talk about some things that maybe we don't talk enough about. I don't know. So my little caption, Dr. Sundemeyer, on my post was, got hormones? Question mark.
This is a good question. I love
it. A little bit about hormones, female hormones, and as well as adrenal fatigue. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you. Okay. And then at a given point when you flag me, then we can certainly open it up to question and answers, because I want to give our listeners, either those that are listening to the sounds of our voice live or watching the replay. And that's the beauty of all this
Yes.
virtual stuff, is that you
There's a
can
replay.
watch a replay. And I'm thankful. There are good things that have come out of COVID. And there are bad things that have come out of COVID, but I like to appreciate the fact that I think we sit down and eat dinner together more. I think that, on things like this, like on a Zoom, we can have people from all over the United States at one given time. And I love, love, love that, because it bridges the gap between distance. And I'm thankful for that. I'm thankful for you. And without further ado, I will turn it over to you, Dr. Sundemeyer.
Well, thank you. Well, first, like Georgia said, I am Dr. Zahada Sundemeyer. I am a naturopathic physician, and I practice in California and in Arizona. Right now, home base is Tucson, but we do telemedicine all over both states. So the really nice thing is kind of like we're doing here, a little Zoom meeting, where we get to touch base and see how things are going and talk about hormones. And that's actually my primary focus, is women's hormones. And I work with women from the age of 10, basically to the ages of 70s and 80s, depending on the concern. I think one of the big things that we don't realize as people is the number of hormones that control our system on a daily basis, or even maybe cyclically. So with women's hormones, we have an array of them that kind of control some day to day, but they also control our monthly cycle or the absence of our monthly cycle. And what I think I will say is I will pause every few sections. That way, if we do have questions right off, I can answer them as we go while we're in our train of thought, because there's some spacing in between. So if there's questions, I'll just pause through it as opposed to taking them at the end too. Sometimes that can be really helpful for some people.
Perfect.
So women have two main upper root hormones. And if you've ever gone into a doctor and said, there's something wrong with my hormones, they've probably tested these two hormones. And that's FSH and LH, follicular stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. And the one thing is these really don't go awry that early. So say you're in your 30s or 40s and you're concerned about your female hormones. Those are the two that are most commonly checked. They're more common often than not in range. And the doctor will send you on your way and let you know that everything is fine. But where we take the next step is checking estradiol, estrone, progesterone. And those are a woman's main hormones for when it comes to the menstrual cycle. And when we're worried about changes to our flow, how long we bleed, or how short the phase in between a bleeding phase might be. And so those are the two, well, I should say 3 big hormones that we pay attention to when we start evaluating the menstrual cycle. So the menstrual cycle averages anywhere between 27 and 35 days. That's what's considered normal. Anything shorter or longer than that is considered abnormal. And there's a lot of different reasons, but it's important to know that the cycle itself is not always the bleeding phase. So the bleeding phase is anywhere between 5 or 7 days. That's where we slough the lining of our uterus. And then we actually go towards the big chunk of the cycle, which is ovulation. And this is really what can affect progesterone, is how healthy or unhealthy our menstrual cycle is. How healthy was the ovulation? And did that healthy ovulation make what's called a corpus luteum, which is formed in the ovaries, to make enough progesterone? And this is one of the biggest faulty things that occurs with women, because, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, but adrenal insufficiency and high levels of cortisol will actually affect progesterone levels and in turn affect the menstrual cycle. So it's this very big, one of the instructors I learn a lot from calls it a big symphony, right? You've got your drums, you've got your string instruments, you got your wind instruments, and if they're not working together well, that symphony doesn't always sound great, right? or they have to learn how to work together. Well, these hormones work together really beautifully, but there's always a priority. And unfortunately, sometimes progesterone is not the priority. But what that kind of will always signal is a change in how your menstrual phase might be. So it might be irritability and crabbiness and insomnia, or just this intense exhaustion, anywhere between 5 to 7 to 10 days before you actually start your bleeding phase again. And that's all associated with the menstrual cycle. So a lot of women get what's called premenstrual syndrome, or PMS. And a lot of people think that this is super normal. I get crabby, I get moody, I get irritable, I can't sleep, I'm huffy at my husband or my significant other. And I just like to remind women that this is not normal. This is not an appropriate experience that we're supposed to deal with. But we live in such a place where estrogen is in so many different things, and it can impact not only the production of estrogen, but mimic estrogen. So that's what we're learning about plastics, right? Everybody knows about BPA free, and that's because those are xenoestrogens. So really, PMS is an indication of imbalance. And ultimately, the question is where is the imbalance? And I think one really great thing to realize is in today's society, where this idea of the go, 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 and our very achieving world sometimes is one of the biggest impacts of a menstrual dysregulation in women. So it can be caused commonly by an estrogen progesterone imbalance, usually an estrogen excess. Ultimately, the question is, where's the excess lie? Is it too much estrogen, which we see? But more common than not, it's actually a lack of progesterone with a normal estrogen, but it still throws you out of whack. So your estrogen is fine, but it's that lack of progesterone, either a lack of healthy ovulation or cortisol pooling and stealing from the production of progesterone. So those are some things that I think women really, need to learn about as we move through our hormone phases. And as we get to the age of 35-ish on average, we can also start entering perimenopause, which is a lovely thing. So, usually an average age of menses is around 13. And then we have that for a few years, and then we hit 35, and all of a sudden everything changes and we can enter perimenopause. And the question ultimately is your stress level. Now, I had a doctor that I was in med school that was one of my professor for rounds. And she used to hate the word stress because stress was such an umbrella statement, and everybody's stress is different. I'm a mom of 4, and I also homeschool my 4 kids, but I also make sure that they're in X, Y, and Z activities. So every day I'm driving them everywhere. Maybe I'm a mom of 1, but then I work full time and I own a business. Maybe I'm no longer a mom because my kids are out, but I still work all the time, and then I make sure and support them. There's so many different possibilities in a woman's sense of wellness that can cause stress. And that's only with the idea of kids and to-dos. There's not even the idea of family matters and marital concerns as well. Okay. So with that, those are some of the things that we like to talk about when it comes to hormone imbalances and PMS. Now, some signs of estrogen excess, which I think are really interesting to hear. Cervical dysplasia. So how many women go get a pap and they're worried about their cells and the health of the cells when they get that pap smear? Well, that's an excess estrogen symptom. Weight gain, headaches before the menstrual cycle starts, or even migraines. We talked about irritability and mood swings. I'm happy, I'm fine, and then someone just chews too loud, and now I'm just angry, and it just gets me, right? Or even the changes in anxiety state that occur before the menstrual cycle. Another really big one that I think is interesting and I think is important to note is uterine fibroids can be a symptom of estrogen excess. Basically, the body can't get estrogen out effectively, and it affects and causes growth. And that's one of the different estrogens that can cause it. The other thing I like to talk about is estrogen is a blanket or umbrella statement, because there's really 3 different estrogens, and they do different things actually. So we have estrone, estradiol, and estriol. Estradiol is what we primarily look at when we're looking at a menstrual cycle, and it actually can produce estrone, especially if you're taking an oral estrogen, for instance. Estriol is actually very protective and very supportive for the uterine health and the uterine lining. It's also really great for breast health and skin health. Some really cool creams out there that have estrogen in them to help with pore size and wrinkles and collagen and elasticity because of some of the benefits of estriol. So estrogens have amazing function in our system. I think they also just get a really bad rap as hormones, right? But with that, any questions starting anything out right now?
I don't see any questions in the chat so far, but ladies, feel we're friends here. And if you have specific questions, that's what Dr. Sundemeyer is here for, is
Yes.
to just kind of give you a voice, let your voice be heard and your question be heard, and maybe give you at least a little direction in that path.
Perfect. Well, with that, let's talk a little bit of signs of progesterone deficiency, because this is actually what starts to stem that statement of perimenopause. And perimenopause is that phase before you truly go into menopause, so that kind of just before phase. And again, it can start anywhere between 35 to
Wow.
52, right around the average age of menopause. So some signs of progesterone deficiency, obviously, we talked about excess menstruation, meaning an increase in blood flow. So say you used to have perfectly 5-day normal flow menstrual cycles, and now you're flooding and having accidents. And it started happening slowly over the last year and a half, right? When you got that new job that's a little bit more demanding, there's always that spark moment. But excess menstruation is a very big sign of progesterone deficiency. And that is where a lot of women start to find me in that mid-40 age, is that change in the way their flow is. It can also shorten the menstrual cycle. So it can now, instead of having a cycle every 28 days, now you have a cycle every 24 days. And remember, when I say cycle, I don't just mean the bleeding phase. I also mean the phase of ovulation and after ovulation, where the idea is preparing for implantation or conception, right? So that's a big one. And that's always a big spark of there's something different going on. And usually at this point in time, the really frustrating thing is this is when a woman will go see their OB, and most likely they'll get put on a birth control, which can definitely mask the symptoms. And it is an external estrogen, but the bad thing about a birth control is it's not necessarily supporting the cause, right? It's a quick Band-Aid fix, but it's not necessarily saying, well, you have all this stress, it's probably going to affect your adrenal gland later down the road, or you're no longer ovulating effectively and you only just need a little bit of progesterone, or you have all this estrogen hanging out. Now we're just masking it by giving you an external estrogen. So there's a lot of different reasons why that can, why that can take place, but that's usually kind of the fix, even in the 40s, is birth control. Okay. Now, big symptoms of progesterone deficiency as we move into our mid-40s is severe anxiety and panic even. So panic attacks really become big right before menopause can start, because you're basically dealing with a lack of progesterone. And as we age, the most common cause of a lack of progesterone, if say you live a great life and everything is fine and dandy and you have the best health and the best, relationship, it can just be because you're not ovulating anymore. So no ovulation means no progesterone. So that's one of the really big things to take note of, is just time, right? So that's something to think about. Now, we also talked about a big sign of progesterone deficiency or even estrogen excess was that migraine or headache before the menstrual cycle. So I just like to reiterate, progesterone is super important for that. Now the big one, let's talk about this. Somewhere along the lines of 46 to 48, most women start noticing the scale change. They can't quite figure out why. Their diet hasn't changed. They still exercise, but for whatever reason, every so often they notice another pound or two have kind of hit that scale, and they're trying to figure out why. And a lot of it is due to progesterone deficiency, that lack of balance between estrogen and progesterone. And that unfortunately is a very normal thing that takes place because of progesterone deficiency.
So a lack of progesterone.
A lack of progesterone. Yeah, the joys of weight gain. So too much estrogen, or estradiol specifically, not enough progesterone can make that estrogen really inflammatory.
So that's our major and minor hormones, correct?
Yep, major hormone is estrogen, minor hormone progesterone. We don't need a lot of progesterone, but we do need it just enough to create that balance that our system is looking for, especially cyclically.
And isn't progesterone kind of your feel-good hormone?
Progesterone is our feel-good hormone, our calming hormone. It helps with sleep. It helps balance, even as we're in higher levels of stress, it can help balance hot flashes and night sweats. It can make us feel less irritable. It can make us sleep. So there's so many positive things associated with progesterone, just like the so many positive things associated with estradiol. I mean, there's research that indicates a lack of estradiol can actually lead to a dementia-like state. And some women notice it very drastically as they move into their mid-50s, where they just, they have Post-its. I had one patient tell me, I email myself all day long because I cannot remember anything. If I don't email myself, I won't remember. Huge brain fog, forgetfulness. And the best part of it is it's forgetfulness sometimes situationally. We're like, oh, I just forget this or that. But sometimes it's like, oh, I'm in the middle of a conversation. Now I have no idea what I've just said. I've lost the train of thought that I'm thinking, and I can't think of that. I just lose everything. And that can also be a sign of stress or estrogen deficiency as well. So estrogen is a beautiful hormone when balanced well, right? So that's always, and that's, I think, the big key, or that statement of the symphony that we talked about earlier. It's all about balance. Any hormone can be detrimental in excess, right? It's all about the place. So now we're kind of in our mid-40s. We're starting noticing changes of our menstrual cycle. We're still dealing with higher levels of stress. And now maybe we're having absence of cycles. We have a cycle maybe every 3 months, maybe every 6 months. But the true definition of menopause is the absence of a menstrual cycle for 12 months straight. You can go a full 10 or 11 months and get a cycle that next month, and you're still considered perimenopausal. And that's happened to a couple of patients of mine, and it was a very upsetting month for them because they had to reset their clock, and it'll happen. It's just one of those things. The really big thing about menopause is that estrogen and progesterone are no longer being produced by the ovaries, and the ovaries are no longer responding to those upper root hormones called FSH or LH. So again, I said FSH was follicular stimulating hormone, and that's what matures the follicle, which will then crack an egg, and we hopefully will either fertilize it or we don't want to, depending on our situation. LH, or luteinizing hormone, is what spikes to signal ovulation and in turn also support the production of progesterone. So now we're at a place where the ovaries are like, I hear you, but I'm not listening anymore. And in turn, we're officially heading towards that menopausal phase. That is the phase where estradiol and progesterone no longer produce. So again, we get more anxiety, maybe we gain weight, but we're also noticing changes in memory. We're noticing changes in hair. We're getting our hot flashes, our night sweats. We don't sleep well. Maybe we're also noticing that we're just a little bit more moody. We lost our balance. We're either more irritable and frustrated, or just quick to be really overwhelmed. Or an opposite, we just are monotone. And that's my favorite, where you're just kind of like, I have no real emotion. I'm just kind of here. I've lost joy. I'm not necessarily sad, but I'm not necessarily anything. And I have women that experience that, just kind of a lack of emotion. And that's also due to that loss in hormone. So menopause can bring about a lot of different things, but the most common things that I talk with women about are changes to hair, weight, skin, right? And then of course, aches and pains, loss of strength and stamina, and then just changes to sense of overwhelm. I'm always irritable and frustrated. I'm easily overwhelmed. Little things get to me all the time. And it's not even always about hot flashes or night sweats. Sometimes it's just more physical, right? Now, hot flashes and night sweats might be a big thing for some people, but they're not always the biggest thing that bring people in. Sometimes it's that sticky note patient. I have to put a sticky note up everywhere. I have to email myself everything so that I don't forget it, right? Sometimes it's that mental emotional side of it, or that memory side of it. And that kind of brings us into adrenal insufficiency or adrenal fatigue. It's called hypoadrenalism, but it's not necessarily a clinical diagnosis because there's not a true deficiency state. You've not fully bottomed out just yet, but it's a decline over time of the two big adrenal hormones, which are cortisol and DHEA. And these are two hormones that I don't think get enough support truly ever. And even I was doing it wrong for years. And that's obviously what time and education and different seminars support practitioners with. But cortisol has so many amazing functions, but some of the deficiency state of cortisol gets confused a lot of the times with actually low thyroid or thyroid imbalance. So things like weight gain and memory changes and hair loss and things along those lines, where everybody always comes in and says, there's something wrong with my thyroid. And I would tell you 70% of the time it's not their thyroid, it's actually their adrenal gland. And it's a sense of burnout. I'm not losing weight. I'm not seeing the muscle growth that I was looking for as I'm at the gym. I do work 2 jobs, and I have, I'm full-time at home, and I'm a single mom. So there's a lot of different possibilities of why that burnout might take place. And the biggest thing is looking at the way cortisol and DHEA are supporting each other. So cortisol has a couple different roles in our system. Cortisol wakes us up in the morning, ready to start our day. Ideally, you feel like you're ready to start the day within that first hour. You get out, you feel energetic, you're bright, your brain feels ready to go, kind of carries you through the whole day. And then as the evening hits, as the sun sets, melatonin kind of starts to take over. You should start feeling a little tired. You should start feeling getting ready for bed. Fortunately, we have all of these beautiful lights that take over that melatonin support, but really that's the goal of cortisol. And then intermittently, we should have stressors. So say, for instance, we're in the woods, we're hunting because it's 100 years ago and it's a whole different world, and we run into a bear. Well, that's a short-term stress. We run, we get all this adrenaline pumping through our system, which cortisol signals, and then it's over. The biggest issue today is that running from the bear statement is not over in that 20-minute period any longer. Now it's happening all day because we hate our jobs or we commute. And I'm sure you've heard or done the commute to the Bay intermittently, I think in the past, right? You've had family that go over there for this or that. And depending on where you live, you might have to make really long drives for medical care or something like that. There's all these things that bring up increases in cortisol over time. And the issue is we don't have an endless supply of cortisol production. So what we do is we take from progesterone or we take from DHEA. So the other big adrenal hormone is actually DHEA. DHEA has 2 big functions. It's the backup generator for cortisol. So we actually inhibit production of DHEA to keep supporting cortisol's production. And over time, DHEA levels will decline. Or it can produce testosterone. And that's actually why I haven't talked about testosterone yet in women, even though it's one of my favorite female hormones. DHEA over time will actually decline, and then in turn, testosterone will decline. And so that's why I saved it for this moment, because low testosterone can be due to a lot of things like stress. But over time, lower levels of cortisol can lead to lower levels of DHEA because one keeps trying to feed the other. And then eventually you kind of go into that burnout phase, fatigued. I get that. I'm kind of exhausted all day long, but I don't have a choice. That's the one thing that I hear so many times women will say, well, I have 2 kids and a family, and I don't really have a choice but to get out of bed. I have to, so I do. But if I gave them the option and I said, well, if you had the option, would you hit the snooze button, right? That's always the big question of adrenal resiliency. Would you
Is
hit
that
the
really a
snooze
question?
button? I mean, I love my snooze button, but only because I haven't slept in a couple of years. I have a 21-month-old, and I'm sure I have one. Like, I don't know how people have more than one. I'm struggling with one. But with that and, being a full-time job, it sometimes can get exhausting. So I'm in my adrenal stress state right now for sure. So these 2 hormones support each other for years. into their 40s, into the 50s. But the one thing that we don't take into account, and this is something that's happening more recently, is very stressful events or very big illnesses. So big stressful events, loss of a family member, a very big car accident that maybe caused a broken leg or some surgery. So like big stressful events. And then of course, big illnesses. Even recently, I've had a lot of menstrual cycles change post-COVID. And ultimately the question is it because it was such a big illness and such a new illness to the system that was already maybe a tired system? And in turn, it just threw a woman. I've had a couple of women that have gone thrown into menopause because of it. So ultimately, we don't know what your spark will be or what will be the culprit of what will cause the burnout, if at all. I have some women whose adrenal glands are resilient and they're in their 60s, but they, everybody's different, and genetically everybody's so different. We don't know how it'll respond. We can speculate and we can support, but everyone's a little bit on the different side. So some burnouts, we talked a lot about long-term stress, right? But some things that people don't think about as long-term stress are like chronic inflammation. My back is always in pain. I have a bad knee and I'm on the go all the time and my knee is always aching. So chronic inflammation or chronic pain are huge things that can stress the body out and in turn stress cortisol and DHEA out. Overly aggressive exercise. So that's my big one. I have had people lose weight just by not exercising 5 days a week, 2 hours a day. Just stopping exercising has been such a huge benefit to the adrenal gland that you're not causing all this stress to the system anymore. And that's actually one of the biggest things that I see with women with low testosterone. I work out all the time. I'm exhausted, but I work out all the time. And I don't see the strength that I think I should be getting from my exercise routine. I'm plateauing. And that's because you're causing your body to go into a defense mechanism, decreasing DHEA and in turn decreasing testosterone production. So that's a big one for me, is overly aggressive exercise. There's actually a really great study about marathon runners and testosterone. So, you ran a marathon, high levels of cortisol for hours upon hours, depending on the person. And then it took 20 days, I think, for testosterone levels to increase again after the high levels of cortisol. So the testosterone bottomed out after the marathon. And it took almost 20 days for that testosterone level to come back up, just with 1 day of excess exercise, right? And that's again because marathons are this really cool adventure of the future, like this very fancy thing that we do now. But 100 years ago, all we did was run from a bear, maybe for 20 minutes, right? So the idea of stress has really changed as well over the last 100 years. So that's a big cause of burnout and a big cause of adrenal insufficiency. Obviously, other things like poor sleep over time can lead to a lot of burnout symptoms as well. And that will affect a lot of things. I think the big thing that we like to talk about too is that 3 a.m. wake up call. How many of you get that? Like, I'm awake. I don't know why I'm awake, but I'm wide awake. And it's 3 a.m. And it's always that 3 a.m. time frame. And that's your adrenal gland kind of going into an overdrive state, causing you to wake up. So everybody's response is a little bit different, but that's always a common culprit of adrenal insufficiency or adrenal stress. Cortisol levels might be getting a little too high, and in turn, instead of having a nice low incline, they'd spike too quickly around that 3 a.m. time zone. Obviously, feeding your system is really important, making sure you're getting plenty of nutrients that feed the adrenal gland. B vitamins, vitamin C is our big one, calcium, magnesium. Obviously, magnesium and zinc are two big deficiencies that we all tend to have, so things that are always good to supplement. But those are some really big considerations of adrenal insufficiency. Any questions?
Okay, we do have some questions, and I have a few questions as well that I'll just sprinkle in between.
Let's do it.
Okay, let me read to you real quick. So Valerie has joined us. Welcome everyone who has joined us while Dr. Sundemeyer was talking. Valerie has a comment. It says, I've had a complete hysterectomy and am on bioidentical hormones. I am 66. Is it okay for seniors to take bioidentical hormones? Do we need it?
So that's a really great question. And honestly, I leave that up to the patient. I do always tell the patient this one caveat. I will be on hormones until the day I die. And the reason is because the benefit outweighs the risk. And as you move into your 60s, one of the biggest concerns in the medical community is this idea of breast cancer. But there was a really great study done, and I'll get the name of the study for you because I can't think of it, but it was a French study that was done after we did the Women's Health Initiative. And the Women's Health Initiative talked about the concerns of hormone therapy and breast health and other diseases, right? And that's where a lot of people started getting really worried about hormone therapy and breast cancer. But the French cohort study, I'm believing I'm remembering it now, the name of the study, actually found, and the populace was 80,000. So it was a huge population of people that they followed for a length of time, found that there was no greater risk for a woman that did no hormones at all to a woman that did bioidentical hormones. They were equivalent risk. So I can give you hormones, and this is the one thing I always remind people, I can give you hormones or I could give you no hormones. I'm not negatively affecting your risk because you've already had 50 some years of hormones, right? So ultimately what we find is as women are on hormones through their 50s and 60s, they get better cardiovascular health. They're less likely to have a cardiovascular event, and they're more inclined to have just better quality of life and sense of wellness, back to that memory conversation and the strength that estrogen actually gives the body. So ultimately, it all depends on your dose and your practitioner. But if I ever have a say, I always say, I encourage people to be on these as long as they feel comfortable being on them. Now, the medical community varies with how they feel. Most of the time, they say you're 60, you should be off of them. But I feel like at 66, there's no real big concern unless you have a big predisposition. And really, that's kind of my statement. It's up to you how you feel comfortable. But personally speaking, that's kind of how I answer that question.
Okay.
But really positive, again, for bone health and brain health and heart health. So,
and it's interesting how
Yeah.
DHEA and brain fog correlate with each other, and really how everything is so connected. When you're low on one and exceeding in another, it creates an imbalance, and your major and minors, it's like a teeter-totter. And when one is high, one might be low. And what we need to do is just kind of bring it to a level, to level it out a bit. And if I'm understanding correctly, Dr. Sundemeyer, correct me if I'm wrong.
Absolutely.
That's what the purpose of having lab work done, blood drawn, to where the practitioner can read and determine, okay, there's a shortage here. Let's do some therapy, some hormone replacement therapy.
Correct.
Bioidentical is correct. Help me if I'm wrong. Is a balance of the two, right?
Well, bioidentical hormone replacement is a chemically similar estrogen replacement, or in this instance, estradiol replacement or progesterone replacement to that your body already makes.
Okay.
Previously, we used to utilize what are called esterified estrogens, and they were chemically different. So just think about that puzzle piece, right? We've all done a puzzle once in our life, and there's that puzzle piece that is just, I can fit it in, but then there's this big gap. And it's not the right piece, but it almost works, but it's also not the right piece of the puzzle, right? It's totally wrong in the picture. So that's where bioidentical hormones are. It's the exact piece to fit into the exact receptor site that our body already is aware of how to utilize. So esterified estrogens or even birth control are chemically different. And that is where a lot of the negative effects of estrogens can come from, is actually oral estradiol. Even if it's bioidentical, oral hormones do have a higher propensity of causing other risks. And I've seen it a lot in the blood work. But yes, bioidenticals, the replacement of the hormones that you're deficient in a proper balance for the person in front of me, is my favorite way to go. So that's kind of that replacement and balance that we're looking for.
Okay, one question, and ladies, if you have any other questions, be sure to put it in the chat. I will do my best to read it, or if you need to text me, you can do so, and then I'll voice it to Dr. Sundemeyer for the next 7 minutes that we have, definitely. But one question was, okay, so adrenal fatigue, what are a few things women can do to reduce it, to treat it, to keep from it, to be aware of it?
I think the biggest thing that you can do to reduce it, or at least be aware of it, is knowing when you're stretched too thin and learning how to say no. I have one patient that loves volunteering, but she's already stretched too thin with her home life and her work. And, she lost her husband a few years ago. So there's this other financial strain on her already. And a big thing that we're working on is her saying no. It's one thing to volunteer here and there, and it's another thing to volunteer for a whole year, right? That can take a lot of stress. So learning how to say no is one of the really big things that I think are important. Taking 10 minutes, almost ritualistically, out of your day, whether first thing in the morning, in the evening before bedtime, where you either do a little bit of meditation, prayer, or even just kind of listen to calming music in the background. So that's actually been shown to calm cortisol level down over time. Just taking 10 minutes of your day.
Okay, next question. Tell me about hair loss at the beginning stages of menopause and what we can do to maybe supplement that, or what are some things one might do?
Well, hair loss at the beginning in that perimenopausal phase can be a lack of progesterone. I've seen progesterone help halt hair loss, but it can also be an androgen excess. So say, for instance, you're going into menopause or that perimenopausal phase, and you're in a very high level of stress. Well, DHEA will also rise at the beginning phases to support adrenal health. So when you're kind of going into burnout, and that's one thing we didn't get into, is there's 3 kind of phases where the hormones go really high. And when DHA goes really high, it can actually aggravate the hair in women, and it can cause a lot of hair loss. And it's kind of like at that crown level. So that's where paying attention, actually having somebody check your levels is really important, and then working on things that can support calming that down. Some women that have what's called polycystic ovarian syndrome also have a higher likelihood of having hair loss on the head due to high androgens. The second androgen is testosterone. And we love testosterone because it's our strength, it's our stamina, it's our muscle resiliency hormone. But too high can actually cause hair loss as well. So those are some of the things that you think about. The one thing I remind people with hair is a ton of minerals. So we all have this idea of biotin with hair loss, and I remind women, trace minerals, mineral supplements, like algae supplements, all of those things that are mineral rich will actually help hair loss more than biotin. Even though biotin has been, for whatever reason, deemed the hormone or the hair helping vitamin. It's a B vitamin, and obviously B vitamins become deficient during stress. And so it's good to supplement, but I've seen mineralization support hair loss 10 times more than I will ever see biotin support hair loss. So
wow.
minerals.
Can you tell me what kind of lab work would be required to test that, as far as why the hair is thinning and loss and whatnot?
Absolutely. So we would call it a basic female panel, and it would be checking progesterone and estradiol.
Okay.
Based on a specific time of the cycle, and usually we check it during the middle luteal phase. It's usually day 21-ish if you have an average cycle, which again was 27 to 35 days. DHEA and testosterone. And then some women, if they have higher levels of one of those two hormones, then we check what's called DHT, or dihydrotestosterone. And that's what can cause male pattern baldness and male hair loss, is DHT. So that's a big one that we check in women as well.
Okay. Okay. Okay, another question is, and then I'll look and see if there's anything here, anything new. By the way, Dr. Sundemeyer has posted two addresses here in the chat that you can take a picture of to get some information on, be it the menstrual cycle and a few things that she spoke of. Okay, sleep. Can melatonin really help? It's a man-made hormone, and depression can be a side effect. Can you please address this?
So we actually make melatonin naturally. It is produced by the pineal gland, and it's produced during low levels of light naturally. And when I was talking about melatonin, I was talking about this idea of all of these lights. So right now, my melatonin is being inhibited because I'm looking at a computer screen. I have a big light shining over my face so that I'm lit, right? And then I have ceiling lights all over because it's dark outside. Most houses have something comparable. And we have this joyous thing called a cell phone or a tablet, depending on the person, which we'd love to be on at night. All of these things will actually inhibit natural melatonin production. And one of the things that I like to remind people is sensitivity to melatonin can vary, but it's not something that can become addictive. And it's actually something that can calm cortisol levels down because it's the natural opposite of cortisol. So cortisol should be nice and high in the morning and calm down through as the evening approaches and as night comes up. And then melatonin, as that sunset arises, say we were living by firelight and candles, right, without all this electricity, as sunset arises, melatonin levels naturally started to be produced, and it would prep us for bedtime, and it was our calming, our sleep hormone. I love melatonin supplementation. I think it's a really positive thing and can be very helpful. It is dose dependent, but there's also some amazing research out there about melatonin in cancer, melatonin in chronic pain and chronic disease. So there's a lot of, I think, misnomers about melatonin, and I feel like it deserves its own talk, but I don't think that melatonin is man-made at all. And if anything, it's made in our brain. So we make it true. But chemically speaking, we've also got it like over the counter at a health food store.
Okay.
Pay attention to the form, pay attention to the dose and the other excipient stuff in the tablet or capsule, of course, and just trust the brand that you're using. And I do have a preference for sustained release, prolonged release, or liposomal melatonin over just an everyday tablet. So that's kind of a preference.
Okay. Okay. Next question. In regards to vitamin D3, is K recommended for absorbability?
So it is recommended for absorbability, and it became a much bigger thing more recently that we supplement and combine K2 with D3. And the reason is because not everybody's digestive system makes vitamin K2 as effectively as we once did. And the primary reason is a lack of vegetables. So technically we were meant to eat vegetables. The gut bacteria convert it into K2, and it helped natural absorption and production of vitamin D. We also have to remember that vitamin D is not an essential vitamin in the sense that we can't make it ourselves, but we all tend to be inside in the middle of the day and in turn are not making it. So naturally we were meant to make it through our skin, but oral absorption does have a big dependency on gut health and K2. So it's all about that supplementation side. So I always tell people, whether you need it or not, all depends on truly your diet. So that's kind of how you would base on. I don't supplement vitamin K2, but I eat vegetables multiple times a day. I just supplement vitamin D3 and try to get sunlight exposure when possible without an SPF.
Without an SPF. Okay, because when we wear sun protection factor, then our body doesn't absorb the D3, right?
Exactly, we don't make it. An SPF of greater than 8 will inhibit natural D production through our skin. And so what I tell people is, be out in the sun, 20 minutes, 30 minutes without sunblock, and then come back inside, cool off, make sure your face doesn't have all kinds of sweat on it, and then apply your sunblock at that point in time, and
Okay.
then go back out and have your skin protection. Because too much is
Okay.
not great, absolutely, but a little bit is actually very essential for our system.
Okay. I have two final questions. I'll try to make them quick, and then certainly allow our listeners to know how to reach you should they have questions or need a doctor, that type of thing. And the final two questions are: one, lymphatic drainage. Can it help improve inflammation markers? That's one. And then the second one is if you can recommend both a pill form and a liquid form of maybe a basic place to start being multivitamins. If you'll address those two and then tell us how people can reach you.
Absolutely. So lymphatic drainage can actually enhance the circulatory system. The lymph system is actually a part of our circulatory system. It's the fluid portion of our blood or our plasma that kind of trickles out into the external tissue. Some people get a lot of inflammation from it. They notice at the end of the day, their feet get more swollen or their fingers get more swollen, and that's kind of lymphatic stagnation. So lymphatic massage can be very helpful. In the sense of inflammation, I think it all depends on what other things you're doing with it. How are you changing your diet? And I hate the word diet, unfortunately, because it means that I'm restricting or I'm modifying or I'm doing something that's impactful or making it so that I'm not getting what I want from my food, right? I don't get my ice cream because I had to change my diet or something like that. But really, how can you balance it? Maybe is a better way. What you put in your system that feeds you. Are you being aware of how dairy impacts you and maybe limiting that a little bit? Are you being aware of how much salt you're consuming? And you have maybe a cardiovascular risk. It'll definitely help your circulation and in turn, better blood flow to the system. And anytime you can increase your blood flow, you're going to help your system out, right? But you also have to remember that it's only part of the equation. So it's not going to be the end all be all. Okay. And then multivitamin, I'm assuming, is what we're talking about.
Yes.
Okay. So I am what one would call a supplement snob for sure. I do like, though, Garden of Life makes a really beautiful multivitamin that is food form and from food sources, but they have a low level of B12. So I always tell people they have to supplement B12 on top of that. So that's one of my favorite, just quick over-the-counter go-tos. They do have a pretty reputable company. They have decent forms of B vitamins because they're all food forms. So it works really nicely as like a quick, I'm going to start up a little bit. Just remember you have to add that little bit of B12 in because you can't make B12 from plants effectively. So you get only a small amount. So you just need a little B12 on the side and that'll kind of be the perfect multivitamin for you. Other than that, depending on the person, anyone that's menstruating, I always recommend with iron. If you're no longer menstruating, then without iron is fine.
Okay. And how can people reach you?
Yes. You can find our website. It's infusionhealth.org. And it's spelled out exactly how it sounds. And of course, you can obviously Google me at Dr. Zahada Sundemeyer. Dr. Zahada Sundemeyer. There's no .com. That would be smart though. I made a .com. And then
Can you spell your first name?
Yes, I can type it out too, just in case.
Oh, perfect.
I have a different name.
It's a beautiful name.
That's what you get when you combine a person in the Peace Corps who's German and Dutch and a Mexican mother. So my name is Zahada Sundemeyer, and again, I'm a naturopathic physician. I'm fully licensed in both states to prescribe and treat and diagnose. I think that's important because there are some naturopathic doctors that go by ND that are certified and they don't necessarily do everything that we do. So that's always one of the big things I like to remind people, who graduated from an accredited medical college or medical school and sat for boards and did all the great stuff. Yeah, if you have any other questions, you can definitely shoot them out to Georgia. I'd be happy to answer them as well as I can. Without knowing your case, I can't be very specific. And obviously labs help me complete my stories and complete your story. But I can definitely at least try and kind of guide you in the right direction or encourage you maybe that it might be time to meet with a practitioner like myself.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for not only your
Absolutely.
time, but your expertise. I think that I hope what the women gather from this evening, Dr. Sundemeyer, I call her Dr. Z.
It's much
Um,
easier that way.
it is that, you know, for us to be aware of our body, and it's absolutely normal to go through this process. And I like
Yes.
to say that birthdays are a privilege not everyone gets. So celebrate your birthday, definitely, because the
Yes.
alternative is a little deep, if you will. And definitely know your body and reach out to your practitioner. If you don't have one, of course, Dr. Sundemeyer is available, but definitely get help because we don't have to do this alone. Thank you, ladies, for joining us this evening, those who joined us live, and then those who watching the replay, who will be watching the replay, please comment in the chat. I will periodically go back and look at any questions. And of course, Dr. Sundemeyer has posted some information as well as her contact information as well. Dr. Sundemeyer, give us your website one last time and we will bid you farewell.
Thank you. And thank you for having me this evening. I do appreciate it. My website is infusionhealth.org, spelled exactly how it sounds.
Infusionhealth.org. There you have it, ladies. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you, Dr. Sundemeyer, and thank you for joining us this evening.
Good night.
Good night.